At 2:14 on January 30th, 2026, in the southern Red Sea, the calm of the night was broken by a sharp alarm inside the Combat Information Center of the USS Delbert D. Black. On the AN/SPY-1DV radar display, the crew watched a scenario that looked almost unreal. From the direction of Yemen's coastline, 32 low-flying objects appeared at the same time, moving at high subsonic speed in complex crossing patterns the Aegis system had never recorded before. All of them were heading directly toward the destroyer. While the ship's computer systems were still working to sort through the crowded radar picture, another warning appeared far above them. Two Fatah-2 hypersonic projectiles, described as part of Iran's newest generation of advanced systems, were descending from the upper atmosphere toward the vessel with extreme speed. The commanding officer had only 45 seconds to make a decision that could determine the fate of the entire ship. The situation had been designed to overload the defensive network, while the destroyer's available interceptors were limited, and the opposing side appeared to have prepared this scenario long in advance. In Washington, President Trump posted a warning about an immediate response. But the question remained: would that response come quickly enough to protect the roughly 300 sailors isolated in the middle of the sea? According to military intelligence sources that surfaced shortly after the incident, this was not a sudden or random move. The pattern closely matched warnings the CIA had reportedly issued 48 hours earlier. U.S. signals intelligence stations in the region had picked up a sharp increase in communications between launch sites along Yemen's coast and headquarters linked to Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. Pentagon analysts believe the arrival of a large U.S. naval formation, reported to include 10 warships entering the area, may have pushed Tehran to act before the fleet was fully positioned. The chosen target was the USS Delbert D. Black. At the time, the destroyer was operating separately from the main formation while carrying out forward picket duties. For strategists in Washington, the intent seemed clear. The opposing side wanted to disrupt the fleet's most advanced radar coverage before U.S. carrier groups could organize their full response posture. It appeared to be a preemptive move meant to send a message, while the American formation was still settling into its combat arrangement. But what truly alarmed the officers aboard the Delbert D. Black was not only the scale of the operation, it was the way it unfolded. The radar data suggested a major leap in technology. The Shahed drones were no longer following simple pre-programmed routes. U.S. sensors detected them communicating with one another in real time, adjusting their paths and reshaping their formation whenever they were detected by radar. Navy technical specialists described it as an AI-guided swarm, a coordinated system built not just to approach a target, but to adapt, confuse, and pressure the ship's defenses from multiple directions at once. The opposing side was deliberately building a confusing radar picture, mixing real threats with decoys in an attempt to overload the Aegis system. Iran's objective appeared clear. The goal was not simply to defeat the American destroyer through raw force, but to pressure a $1.9 billion vessel into using tens of millions of dollars worth of advanced interceptors against low-cost UAVs, each worth only a few $1,000s. Once the ship's available defenses were reduced, the two Fatah-2 hypersonic systems would have a much clearer path toward the vessel. Had the plan worked, the USS Delbert D. Black could have become a powerful symbol of a much larger problem, the growing challenge facing U.S. deterrence strategy in the Middle East. Now here's the question for you. With 32 incoming targets appearing at the same time, do you believe the U.S. Aegis Shield could hold the line? Comment yes or no below. There was no time left for long calculations or debate. In a critical moment, the captain had to make the decision every commander hopes to avoid, giving full control of the ship's defensive response to a computer-driven system. Auto Special Mode was activated, turning the destroyer into a high-speed defensive platform capable of reacting far faster than any human team could process. The deck trembled as the forward and aft Mark 41 VLS cells opened almost simultaneously. Seconds later, the dark sky above the Red Sea was split by columns of light. 12 ESSM interceptors launched upward, creating a medium-range defensive barrier against the approaching UAV formation. Each interceptor was designed to counter lightweight aerial targets across a wide area, giving the ship a chance to break apart the coordinated swarm before it could close the distance. But the most intense part of the engagement was unfolding much higher in the atmosphere, where the two Fatah-2 hypersonic projectiles were descending at extreme speed. To respond, the Aegis system had to use one of the U.S. Navy's most valuable defensive tools, the SM-6 Dual 2. To maximize the chance of interception, the system launched 4 of them almost immediately. In only a few seconds, around $20 million in advanced hardware was sent into the sky. The night flashed orange as the interceptors met their targets. Pieces of the UAVs and high-speed projectiles scattered downward into the sea like a burning meteor shower. One by one, the red markers on the radar screen began to disappear. The U.S. defensive network had held through the first wave, proving the strength of its technology under enormous pressure. But the relief did not last. Before the smoke had fully faded, a warning appeared on the ammunition management display. The number was enough to make the officers in the Combat Information Center go silent. Magazine depth critical. After just 3 minutes of engagement, nearly 40% of the ship's main air defense inventory had already been used. This was exactly the scenario military analysts had warned about. One of the fleet's most advanced destroyers now looked like a heavyweight fighter who had thrown his strongest punches in the opening round, only to realize the match was far from over, and his energy reserves were already running dangerously low. The opposing side's economic pressure trap had worked exactly as intended. And just as the destroyer reached its most vulnerable point, the hull-mounted sonar detected an unusual pattern beneath the surface. Sharp, strange whistling sounds cutting through the water. The second wave had begun. This time, it came from the direction the Aegis system was least focused on. Out of the dark horizon, streaks of white foam began racing across the sea at nearly 50 knots, closing fast on the ship. The electro-optical sensors quickly identified the new danger. 20 unmanned surface vessels were moving in, spreading out across the water like a coordinated hunting pack. They did not follow a simple route. Each craft shifted direction unpredictably, weaving away from defensive fire and turning the sea around the destroyer into a moving puzzle. Every second, the crew had to guess which threat would come closest next. But the situation was about to become even more complicated. At the same time, coastal radar stations linked to Iran suddenly changed their signal pattern to continuous wave illumination, locking onto the USS Delbert D. Black. To the officers in the Combat Information Center, that meant only one thing. Something else was being guided toward them. Something the long-range radar had failed to track. Then it appeared. An AI-1 cruise missile, flying only about 3 meters above the sea to stay hidden from detection, suddenly emerged less than 10 kilometers away. The Delbert D. Black had been pulled into a classic pincer scenario. The crew had to look down toward the water to deal with the unmanned boats, while also watching the side of the ship for a sea-skimming missile approaching at high speed. The Phalanx CYWS, the vessel's final defensive layer, spun into action. Its barrels roared as streams of 20mm rounds formed a protective wall around the destroyer. But the opposing side had clearly studied the system's limitations. The Phalanx could only engage one direction at a time. When the gun turned toward the port side to stop one incoming craft, the starboard side was left dangerously open to another. The ship's missile inventory had already lost much of its flexibility after the first wave, and using a multi-million-dollar interceptor against a small composite vessel was not a realistic option at such close range. Then, in the middle of the chaos, one unmanned craft slipped through the defensive fire and detonated about 50 meters from the port side. A massive shockwave pushed tons of seawater over the deck. Inside the command space, electronics flickered again and again. The aft radar briefly lost signal. The billion-dollar destroyer shuddered under the force of a low-cost system designed not to overpower it directly, but to disrupt, distract, and weaken it at the worst possible moment. The U.S. Navy's technological confidence was now being tested in the harshest way. Without a fast change in the situation, the fate of the USS Delbert D. Black could be decided in seconds. At the height of the crisis, when mechanical guns had reached their limits and traditional ammunition was no longer the best answer, the commanding officer authorized a system the opposing side had not expected. Helios entered the fight. The 60-kilowatt-plus high-energy laser, quietly added during the ship's late 2025 upgrade package, was unlike the missiles and guns that had filled the night with noise and fire. Helios did not roar. It did not shake the deck. It worked in near silence, and that silence made it even more unsettling. It used no gunpowder, created no visible blast, and had almost no delay. Most importantly, it moved at the speed of light. An invisible beam of concentrated energy locked onto the optical sensors at the front of the incoming unmanned boats. Within moments, the temperature surged beyond the limits of their systems. Camera lenses distorted, control components failed, and the vessels began losing coordination. Across the surface of the Red Sea, an almost surreal scene unfolded. The fast-moving craft that had been racing toward the destroyer suddenly veered off course. Some spun in wide, uncontrolled circles. Others slowed, drifted, or became harmless shapes on the water. The coordinated pack that had pressured the ship from every angle was breaking apart in silence. But the most urgent threat was still closing in. The NASA-1 cruise missile approaching at extremely short range. Helios shifted targets in a fraction of a second, faster than any traditional rotating weapon system could move. The laser focused on the missile's guidance section and control surfaces. As those key systems failed, the missile lost stability, began to wobble, and dropped into the sea, sending a towering column of water into the air only a few hundred meters from the ship. The $1.9 billion destroyer had survived because of a last-second reversal no one on the opposing side had expected. But even the most advanced defensive system could not solve the deeper problem. The source of the threat was still out there, hidden beyond the horizon. Now the U.S. needed a response, and it had to come immediately. The problem was distance and terrain. The launchers were positioned deep inland, concealed by mountains and far beyond the radar reach of the USS Delbert D. Black. If the Navy waited for satellite confirmation, then passed reports through multiple command channels, the mobile launchers could be moved, hidden, and gone long before any response was approved. The solution came from a capability the U.S. Navy had spent years refining for exactly this kind of situation. NIFC-CA, Naval Integrated Fire Control, Counter-Air. Roughly 400 miles to the north from the flight deck of the USS Abraham Lincoln, two dark silhouettes separated from their patrol pattern. They were F-35C Lightning II stealth fighters, moving quietly toward the edge of contested airspace. To preserve their low observable profile, the aircraft kept their radars silent. Instead, they relied on passive electro-optical sensors, scanning the terrain without broadcasting their position. Within minutes, the F-35Cs detected residual heat patterns from the recently used Fatah II launchers. Through the secure Link 16 data network, the target coordinates were sent in real time to the fire control system aboard the USS Delbert D. Black. The destroyer, still recovering from the earlier waves, suddenly had something it had lacked only seconds before: a clear path to answer back. The order was confirmed almost instantly. Across the deck of the USS Delbert D. Black, the remaining VLS launch cells shook as they opened again. Moments later, Tomahawk Block 5 cruise missiles, among the most advanced land attack systems in the U.S. arsenal, rose into the night sky and accelerated toward their assigned route. Above the region, the F-35Cs continued feeding updated targeting data, allowing the Tomahawks to adjust their path in real time. 12 minutes after the launch command in a remote valley deep inside southern Iran, the missile units that had taken part in the earlier operation had nowhere left to hide. Their mobile launchers were already being packed up and moved, but the window for escape had closed too quickly. The Tomahawks entered their final approach with extreme precision, guided toward the heat signatures and coordinates passed through the Navy's data network. One after another, the strikes landed with remarkable accuracy. The equipment that had been presented as a symbol of advanced regional power was reduced to burning wreckage, while the launch site itself disappeared beneath clouds of smoke and dust. The message was unmistakable. The U.S. Navy had not only survived the pressure test, it had answered it with speed, coordination, and reach. Back in the tense waters of the Red Sea, the USS Delbert D. Black continued cutting through the waves. The ship had taken punishment. The ram coating along the port side was scorched and blistered from the nearby blast. Its phased array radar required urgent inspection, and a large portion of its defensive inventory had already been used. But the destroyer was still moving, still connected, and still holding its position. Then, on the horizon, massive dark shapes began to emerge. The larger American naval formation had arrived. 10 U.S. warships, led by the aircraft carrier USS Abraham Lincoln, entered the area and formed a powerful protective screen around the damaged destroyer. What had moments earlier been a single ship under intense pressure had now become the center of a reinforced wall of steel. The confrontation of January 30th, 2026 ended quickly, but the message it left behind carried far beyond the Red Sea. Iran had tested the limits of the U.S. Navy with a layered and carefully planned operation. It used drones, fast unmanned boats, cruise missiles, and long-range systems in an attempt to stretch American defenses to the breaking point. But the plan ran into something deeper than a single ship's firepower. A network defense structure built on sensors, data sharing, stealth aircraft, precision systems, and directed energy. This moment revealed a new reality of modern naval conflict. Victory is no longer decided only by the size of the arsenal. It is decided by who processes information faster, who connects their platforms better, and who can respond across air, sea, space, and digital networks before the opposing side can disappear. And for everyone watching, one point became clear. When Washington warns of an immediate response, it is not just a political statement. It can become action within minutes. Now the question remains, after seeing an entire carrier group move into position, will Iran risk another attempt? Or has the message already been received?